I'm aware that in this room there are a number of middle school students and high school students, and there might even be some students that are in the midst of their undergraduate or graduate studies. And one thing that perhaps all of these students have in common is in their academic studies, there's an expectation to do a lot of reading. And of the parents who are in this room, I'm sure we can recall what it was like to manage all those responsibilities. And I recall myself the tall task of having to read chapter after chapter, book after book, in order to move forward in my academic career. And then when I was in my undergrad, someone pointed something out to me in a lecture by, and I think, Jason, you'll appreciate this, Dr. Moss, Psych 101. One of his students gave a guest lecture on speed reading. And one of his hints was, all you really need to do is pay a lot of attention to the beginning of your book or article, and pay a lot of attention to the end of your book or article. And between those two, you really can get the gist of the article. So if you got other things to do, say at night, and you want to minimize your reading time, focus on those two pieces. After a year where we have responsibly read every week after week the Torah portion, and we have demonstrated here, myself, Rabbi Kornberg, how important it is to come every Shabbat to hear a section of the Torah, because there is so much beauty and wisdom that all of us should apply to our lives. I can also add that it was not lost on the rabbis that if you focus on the beginning of the book and the end of the book, where we are right now, of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, you can pretty much get the gist of what the entire Torah is about. So, if you'll allow me, and don't worry, Dr. Earne, I'm still going to encourage everyone to come to shul, and there's still many details that you should still come to synagogue every Saturday. That being said, let me propose the following. In the beginning of the Torah, God creates the world. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. That's the verse. We learn our first command, which is pru or vu. You should be fruitful and multiply. And God tasked us to be the keepers, the shomrei, the people who will rule this world. That's how the Torah begins. And in the end of the Torah, in this week's Torah portion, by the way, we are 3 weeks away from reaching the end of the entire Torah. We're going to read the words today. Lo bashamayim hi. God is no longer here. So in the beginning, we receive the world, and in the end, God leaves. And what you put these two ideas together, and you get this idea that we received an incredible gift at the beginning of the Torah, and at the end, we are left with this gift, and God is no longer here. It likens a lot to what it means to be a parent to a newborn in the hospital. You are born. I remember when my children were born, there was a nurse that looked after us, made sure that all the vital signs were okay, even packed up our room and moved us to our where we were going to stay the night. And there was a sense that everything was going to be taken care of. I just had to follow the guidance of the nurses in the hospital. That is Bereshit. God creates the world, and don't worry, God's going to take care of it all. And then at the end of the Torah, God leaves, and we are left being the caretakers. It shouldn't surprise us then that in this week's Torah portion as well, God says, the Torah teaches us that in our hands is a blessing and a curse. We have the capacity to make a choice for something good to happen or for something not so good to happen. And what is going on here is the Torah is teaching us that we need to understand what it means to be responsible for our lives and for the world that we live in. This is the message of the Torah. It is a lesson 101 in what it means to be responsible. And if you're like, whoa, that's a lot of responsibility. How do I do that? How do I figure all that out? Good news, the Torah spends 52 sections making sure that there are guidelines and narratives and stories that we can follow, rules that we can observe that will keep us on the right path. In fact, the last Torah portion, the last law in the entire Torah, also found in this week's Torah portion, is that everyone should make for themselves their own Torah. That's mitzvah 613. And what is the purpose of that? If we should ever forget what we have to do, if we should ever become overwhelmed, and how do we maintain this sense of caring for the world? Well, make yourself a Torah, keep the guidelines close, and you will know what to follow. There's a lot of things that work very well for us right now, because now we have a sense of what the Torah means, and we have some guidelines to follow. It seems simple, makes perfect sense. All we got to do is follow the Torah. Except, as we know, not so easy. And I want to propose to everyone 3 challenges that we face, and how in the end of this Torah portion, Moses, mindful of them, gives us some pathways for how we can manage that. Number 1, too often do we not accept the yoke of responsibility. What does it mean not to accept the yoke of responsibility? It means to make an assumption that somebody else will handle that. Oh, don't worry, God will take care of it. Or fill in the blank, someone else, the future will take care of it, this group, or whatever. And to that, we, as I shared earlier, the Torah says, Lo b'shamayim hi. God's not going to figure things out for us. It's in our hands. 2, as I mentioned earlier, how do I know what to do? How do I know? What if I forget? Engage in study. Engage in the act of learning, and that will keep you fresh. And 3, I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. What do I do when I make mistakes? And part of what it means to be a human being is that we all know we are not perfect. And for the Torah to make this assumption that all of us can handle this responsibility puts us in a place, knowing that we are imperfect, that we can follow through, that the logic of the entire Torah, that human beings can now handle this responsibility. Well, what happens when we make mistakes and we are not perfect? It would seem that the entire enterprise would fall apart. We can't turn to God, and we've already made mistakes. What do we do? And that's why I want to bring us again to this week's Torah portion, where we are introduced to this idea of teshuvah. Later on, we're going to open up to chapter 30, verses 1 to 10, and it's a beautiful section about what it means to engage in teshuvah. Teshuvah, in the simple meaning of the text, means to return, means to find our way back to Israel, or we could say find our way back to who we are meant to being. And the beautiful piece here is that teshuvah, learning from our mistakes, finding our way back, gives us a space to fall short and to not be stuck, because we are now empowered to learn from our mistakes so that we can then reclaim the responsibility that the Torah is putting in our hands. In Judaism, you may have heard that we focus not on the world to come, but we focus on the world that we live in today. and that makes perfect sense when we are not making mistakes. But when we make mistakes and we deal with the consequences of our action, what happens then? Judaism says, don't worry, it's not over. You can still learn from your mistakes and reclaim, again, that sense of responsibility. On a deeper level, when the Torah is talking about this act of teshuvah, we'll see two ways that the act of teshuvah is framed. One way is, Vishavta ad Adonai, you return ad, up until God, and the other is, Tashuv el Adonai, you return to God. And for those of us who are thinking, even though it's okay to make mistakes and learn from them, I still am overwhelmed with the responsibility of caring for this world. There's too much to learn. I struggle too much with my imperfections. Well, to those of us who are in that group, the Torah is speaking to us. Because when the Torah says, Ad Adonai, the Torah is saying, even those of us who don't completely learn from our mistakes, who don't completely fix everything, even if we try and do our best, that still counts. That there is still a reward, there's still a positive effect as a result of that. And the other category is when you return to God, because you never know. Even if you don't fix everything, every once in a while, due to our consistent effort to learn from our mistakes, we might ultimately reach our goal. So at the end of the Torah, when our tradition and Moses is trying to explain to us what does it mean to manage responsibility, it's giving us a pathway for how to be imperfect, for when we are imperfect, to learn from our mistakes and to grow. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise, therefore, that this week's Torah portion always comes before the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the new year. And one way we understand what it means to enter into the new year is we get a clean slate. And it is during Rosh Hashanah that we listen to the sound of the shofar, and one of the messages of the shofar is to hear the sound of the shofar as if it emanates a sound of crying. That we think will cause us to listen to the people that we may have hurt due to the mistakes we may have made, their cries, and to learn from them. And through that process of learning from our mistakes, we can enter into the new year with a fresh start. The last thing I would add is if you look at the text of this week's Torah portion, it's not only speaking to us individually, but it's speaking to us as a people. And I would add that this has been a very trying year for those of us who identify as being members of the Jewish people. And I think the lessons of this week's Torah portion are very apt for all of us to hear. 1, Lo b'shamayim hi. There is no one else who is going to handle the problems that we have to deal with, especially in the realms of anti-Semitism. We have to accept that challenge, accept the responsibility of standing up to anti-Semitism. 2, if we are lost and we need to find a pathway for how to deal with the challenges that we face, our Torah offers us a pathway. And 3, it's a hard time for us, for the people of Israel, for our leadership in all fronts. And therefore, we have to provide a space for ourselves and for our fellow community members and for our leaders to not be perfect. And we have to hope and pray that we, our fellow community members, and our leaders we'll continue to learn from the choices that we make so that ultimately we can emerge from this year with a sense of peace, shalom, that will not only dwell in our hearts, but also, and especially, and not only on college campuses perhaps, but also in the land of Israel. Shabbat shalom.